Hey everybody! So recently I put up a video on my main channel that was primarily focused on good traits of Sean and 12, the two worst characters in Third Strike. That video went over unbelievably well, the reception has been kind of incredible and I'm extremely happy with it. However, because of the more limited focus of the video, there was quite a lot about these characters that I wanted to bring up, and I kind of couldn't because it just didn't really make sense given the topic of the video. That's left me with a lot of silly little fun facts that are unyapped about, and I really want to do something about that. On top of that, there are also a few things I missed in that video and a few little mistakes I made. So I figured I'd smash everything together and make a video for the second channel where I address the things I got wrong, mention some things I probably should have mentioned, and then just talk about some things that wouldn't have made sense for that video. A lot of silly, esoteric information that's just fun to talk about. This video is going to be a lot more laid back and lightly edited than that one, but if you're here, I'm sure you don't mind. Also, if you haven't seen that video, you probably should. This video won't make a whole lot of sense if you haven't, because there's a lot of very important things I'll be leaving out while mentioning a lot of silly niche information, and it will seem kind of strange. If you're cool with all of that, then let's get into it. We're going to start with things that I missed or were worth mentioning, then get into some silly information, and then end off on one thing that I wanted to mention, but I was genuinely just confused about, and admittedly still am. Somehow, the first thing I need to talk about actually relates to Remy rather than Sean or 12. There's a bit in the video where I show characters who don't have a confirm to super that can only be parried high, and a confirm to super that can only be parried low, and I include Remy among those characters. But I shouldn't have. Remy technically does have a confirm to super that can only be parried low. You can raw confirm SA1 and SA2 off a low fireball. It's situational because it requires charge, but it does exist. Sean's little gimmick where he throws a ball at the start of the match if he's picked as the player 2 character or immediately after losing a game isn't strictly tied to those two things. I think it's tied to whether or not his stage is being played on. Against Q, the only character in the game with no stage, Sean always gets to throw the ball no matter what. In the mirror, player 2 always throws the first ball, and from then on it's business as usual. Target combo to SA3 also works on Makoto, but I missed it because it works differently to how it does on other characters. Instead of delaying the heavy kick against a croucher, you do it as early as possible and it only works on a standing Makoto. 12 may be unable to perform instant air dash jump heavy punch, but I kind of made it sound like they were strictly limited to performing it from much higher up when that's just not the case. With a small manual delay on the air dash, you can get something that's close enough, and is very strong since it's indistinguishable from instant air dash jump heavy kick, which you can use for empty lands. I mentioned the very situational crouching light kick, light punch axe into super, but 2 crouching light kicks into super does work, although it's not very reliable and quite difficult. It's very range and character dependent. I couldn't even do it on a point blank crouching Ryu. I mentioned how Sean's EXDP can trade against meaty attacks since the invul ends 1 frame before the hitbox appears on frame 9, but this move actually has a bigger issue. It only has strike invul, no throw invul, meaning that if you do it on wake up, it's only throw invul for 6 frames thanks to the natural throw invul you get on wake up in Third Strike. Getting thrown out of this move on wake up is a real issue, since anyone trying to throw you on wake up in general knows to delay it to account for the universal throw invul. When touching on situations where SA1 is the only super Sean can land, I mentioned high DP connects and long range anti-airs, but I neglected to mention one pretty important combo, anti-air close medium punch to SA1. This also technically works with SA2, but I don't think it matters because you lose tons of damage. I mentioned that 12 has the 5th lowest health in the game as a noticeable flaw given that it further exemplified their poor risk reward, but I probably should have mentioned that Sean technically has the 6th lowest. He shares his health value with 5 other characters, and granted the gap between him and 12 is much bigger than 12 and the character below them, but it's still quite a bit lower than Ryu and Ken's, which is frustrating given his reliance on defensive play and unsafe mix-up options. While the weaknesses I mentioned, like being 1 long bar and having 1 reliable confirm is bad enough, 12's SA2 has another bizarre weakness that someone in the comments pointed out. If it hits an airborne opponent, something it should excel at thanks to its fast startup and excellent hitbox, it loses nearly half of its damage. It's completely absurd given that it's already not that strong compared to other supers with 1 long bar, but it seems completely intentional given the different animation. I spent a lot of time on 12's SA1, and while I briefly explained why SA2 isn't very good, I called SA3 complete garbage and just moved on. Most Third Strike players are familiar with why it's so awful, but I know a lot of my audience doesn't play Third Strike, and I did have a couple people ask me how a super that lets you play as a better character with a damage buff and resistance could be so bad. so here's a quick rundown. 1. Unlike Yon's Genajin or Makoto's Tenden Renki, the long activation combined with 12's limited super cancelable options mean they have no reliable way of using the install in combos. 2. It's one long bar, limiting how much you can use EX Needle and EX Dive. 3. When it ends, you're forced into a 73 frame animation where you take double damage. 4. While transformed, you can't use EX moves or supers. Turning into a better character means nothing when you're missing out on so much of what makes these other characters better in the first place. 5. Not only do you have no metered options, but since your meter is replaced with a timer, you can't build any meter for a full 22 seconds. Whiffing normals for meter is an important tool for many characters to force the opponent to approach, and 112 cannot enforce for the entire duration of this super. At least with other expensive supers like Hugo SA1 and Ryu SA2, you can immediately start building meter again after cashing out, but X-Copy is quite literally the single least meter efficient super in the game. 6, and lastly, is the obvious issue of opportunity cost. By dropping SA1 for SA3, you give up 12's only reliable ender that gives a knockdown and their only source of decent damage for the single most expensive gimmick in the game. So that's everything that I either should have mentioned or at the very least kind of wanted to mention but couldn't really find a good way of fitting into the video. Everything from here on out is stuff that didn't really make sense to include, but I just thought was kind of cool and fun. Firstly, there's one extremely minuscule, almost imperceptible way in which Sean is worse off than Ryu and Ken. While he has the same length stun bar, he actually recovers stun very slightly slower than Ryu and Ken. For reference, Makoto has the fastest stun recovery, taking 20 frames to recover 1 pixel, while Yon, Yang, Ibuki, and Oro are tied for the slowest at 24 frames. For Ryu and Ken, it's 22, while it's 23 for Sean and Akuma. This one's less of a fun fact and more of an actual complaint. I briefly mentioned how Sean's heavy jump normals uniquely have the hit stun of mediums, but didn't touch on how that actually affected him. Notably, it has horrendous synergy with his crouching medium kick. Crouching medium kick is your best normal for comboing into DP by far, thanks to how far forward Sean moves by the time it makes contact with the opponent, making up for its poor range. But the 7 frame startup, combined with Sean's lack of a high hit stun jump normal, makes going into DP off a jump in kind of a nightmare. Sean is at most +9 after a jump in. Even if you hit on the last possible frame, going into crouch medium kick is best case scenario a 2 frame link in a game without traditional input buffer. SA2 may have the least confirms of any of Sean's supers, but there's one extremely funny unique confirm that I wish I could have mentioned. You can link into SA2 from EX Tatsu on a crouching opponent, but only if the first hit whiffs and the following hit stun the opponent. The first hit of all Tatsus force stand on hit, which at least for EX kinda sucks because the later hits of the move actually work fine against crouches. All this does is make the move always -1 on hit in combos instead of sometimes +1 against crouches, and ruin any practicality this combo had. I mentioned how Sean can combo SA1 into a second SA1 if you trade with certain fireballs or Aegis, but with even less practical setups, you can actually get all 3 in the one combo. In the mod Forward Striker Ranged Edition, Sean SA1 is the only super in the game you can stock 4 of, and there, yep, you can get combos with all 4 with the same silly setup. Sean has exactly one move which I didn't show or mention a single time in the original video, and that's his EX overhead kick. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's comically dysfunctional. Compared to the meterless versions, it has the same startup and stun, but is much better on hit and block, hitting 3 times doing about 50% more damage. Unfortunately, despite the fact it's an overhead, you can't connect all 3 hits against a single crouching character. You get 2 on Hugo doing a little more damage than the meterless versions at the cost of some stun, and you get only 1 hit against every other character, which has pitiful returns. There's a reason I've been using Hugo for my footage here too, because getting all 3 hits on a fucking standing opponent only works on Hugo, Q, and Urien. Still, while pretty terrible for mix-up, it's probably better as a neutral tool. It is always -1 on hit and block, and it's a much harder parry than the meterless versions, especially in the air. When touching on things that felt like deliberate attempts to make Sean the worst Shoto, I mentioned how some of his heavy normals had the meter build of mediums. He's the only Shoto with any of these, but funnily enough, 12 also has one with their sweep, an odd limitation given how committal it is. On the other hand, 12's crouching heavy punch actually has higher meter build than most heavies, building 4 pixels on whiff. The only other normal I can think of off the top of my head that does this is Ryu's forward heavy punch, but while interesting, the move is still garbage. Something cool someone in the comments pointed out is that 12's neutral jump light punch can be used as an instant overhead against most of the cast. It's pretty neat considering 12 is the only character in the game with no grounded overhead outside of the universal one, but unfortunately it's extremely weak, and if it doesn't stun or kill, you're minus 25 on both hit and block. Here's something really funny but kinda sad someone pointed out in the comments. 12's standing heavy punch maxes out the juggle counter if it connects on an airborne opponent. Since it's not a move you can usually juggle out of, this does exactly two things. One, it means that you can't juggle out of it even on a stunned opponent, and two, it means that you can't reset into a super. Both hilarious restrictions given how limited SA1 is in air connects and how low 12's stun output is on the whole. Another thing pointed out in the comments that doesn't affect gameplay much but is a cool lore detail is that 12 has several moves with identical or similar animations to Necro. Necro's appearance and powers come from being experimented on by the Secret Society as a part of the G Project, the same project that led to 12's creation, so it's a neat way of conveying that through gameplay. I showed a couple juggles out of Anti-Air Axe, but there's a particularly sad one that I really wanted to sneak in somewhere, but didn't because it's not one you'd ever actually want to do. If you super cancel the first hit of Anti-Air Axe to SA1, you'll pretty often just get a single hit, a contender for one of the saddest looking combos in the game. I didn't have much nice to say about 12's Taunt, mainly due to its lengthy 79 frame startup. However, if you want, you can actually make it even worse. 12 is usually completely actionable while becoming visible again, but if you taunt while invisible, you can manually end the invisibility early with the same uninterruptible 79 frame animation but played in reverse. If you want to be a nerd about it and count this as a separate taunt, this is almost definitely the worst taunt in the game. Even worse than Remy's, which takes 131 frames for a minuscule stun increase, or Makoto's Hayate taunt, which does nothing but add 32 frames of recovery to the move. Lastly is something I wanted to mention in the original video, but I just genuinely could not wrap my head around, and I wasn't sure if I was missing something or was just falling for misinformation, so I eventually gave up on it. It relates to the 12.5% stun boost that Sean gets when performing a taunt. On Sean's super combo page, there's a line mentioning that if Sean hits before the ball does, the bonus stun from his taunt doesn't go away. It's a little vague, but there's two ways to take this. One is the completely true and verifiable fact that if Sean hits the opponent before the ball connects with the opponent, he still has a stun buff on his next hit or combo, just a smaller one. It's really tiny. Two, and what I think is being implied here because I have heard it mentioned before, is that if Sean hits before the ball does, the stun buff that he gets from his taunt lasts until the end of the round. This would be awesome if true. Getting a mediocre buff from your taunt with the upside being that it's permanent would be awesome, but unfortunately, no, that's just not true. I did mess around with it a little in case it was just worded wrong, like maybe if Sean and the ball had to connect on the same frame, or if the opponent had to hit Sean before the ball hit them, or even if Sean had to knock the opponent out before the ball hit them, and then you'd get the stun buff in the next round. But no, none of that gets Sean a permanent stun increase. So either this is just lying, or I'm missing something. I'm not sure. I know, at least when it comes to Third Strike, Super Combo does not have the best reputation in the world. I've fallen for stuff here before that's just been wrong.
And now this is a super small thing, and it's probably just an unfortunate coincidence, but like, on the exact same move, they did get this wrong. You can parry it in both directions. So I'm just saying, something might be off here.
Still, I'd really like to be wrong here, because if any part of this is true and there is a way to get Sean a permanent stun increase, I don't know, I just think that'd be really fucking sick. I just really wanted it to be true, so I'd be kind of bummed out if it isn't. Either way, that's all I had to say. I hope you enjoyed this, and more so, I hope you enjoyed the original video. I'm really happy with it, so I hope this little addendum was kind of fun. Bye.